Okay, welcome everybody to the annual Carson Smith training. My name is Tony Zambrana. I'll be one of the hosts for this meeting. Just some quick requests for everybody to please mute your microphone. We will not be having interaction via audio during this meeting. We're going to be recording this meeting so that way we can have it uploaded for future reference. So that way all of you guys and those who were not able to attend the meeting can access this at any time throughout the year. And we will have times for questions to be typed in the chat during different periods of the training. So we'll have Esther field those questions. But before we get started on the Carson Smith specific training, we have some help desk training that is going to be provided by Neil. So I will go ahead and first turn the time over to him. And then after he's done with his slides, then we will open it up for a couple of questions for him. So having said that, I appreciate everybody coming, and we will turn the time over to Neil. And then Neil, you just let me know when you want me to switch slides.
Okay, that's me. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Harvey. I'm with the application support team here at USBE, and Paula will be joining us soon if she's not already on. She's also our team lead at with the application support team. So today I want to go over three things listed here on the screen. The first is our help desk access. This is where you can place tickets and access help desk team with any questions you might have with primarily with accessing and logging into Seascapes. So the second thing we will address is the remote desktop portal. As many of you know, this is the new way in which we are accessing Seascapes. It's through a web portal, which gives you access really from any browser to Seascapes. And then finally, we'll just briefly hit the Seascapes login process, which you're probably all familiar with. Okay, so.
Oops. Apologize for moving that.
No, that's perfect. So let's go over the help desk website really quick. Once again, this is where you place a ticket. And so the web address is listed there, the app help desk.
It's not just the government. I think it's our discretion. If we don't feel it's wiser to on-site school, we should be.
Right, it's up to.
Sorry, parents, this is what we do. And
I'm not sure if that's a question.
It's okay.
That was very garbled. I'm not sure who was speaking on that.
No, they've muted now. Tony, it was just talking in the background. We're good.
Okay, go ahead and continue. Sorry about that.
Thanks. Hopefully I'm coming through okay.
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay, great. So the web address, and I would highly recommend bookmarking this because this is the primary way in which we would like you to contact the help desk. Before it used to be by phone, but I think you'll get better service this way because the ticket comes right into the queue and all of our help desk agents can see it and collaborate and respond. So it's really the ideal way. So it's apphelpdesk.schools.utah.gov. And everyone on the Seascapes email list should already have a help desk account created for them. And we've emailed a temporary password to you. So if you want to search your inbox, you should find that email, and it's from apphelpdesk@schools.utah.gov. So you could search for App Help Desk, for instance. And it's pretty simple. You just hit the website. You'll log in with your username, which is your email address, and your password, which is the temporary password from the email. I would recommend that once you've logged in, that you click the profile icon. It's up in the right-hand corner of the screen, and you can change your password in My Profile. Okay, there's basically the three main functions of the help desk. is obviously to create a ticket for whatever your issue is. And please fully describe the issue. It helps to actually know how to proceed. So instead of just saying, I have a problem with Seascapes, actually say what problem you might be having with logging in and that kind of stuff. The second thing that the help desk does is allows you to view or edit your previous tickets. I really like Case. That's the help desk that we use software. It keeps a full record of everything that you've communicated with us and what we can communicate back. So if you think you've hit an issue before, it's nice to look at your history as opposed to creating a new issue or new ticket. The third thing is the knowledge base. Now, the knowledge base for Seascapes is not very deep, but you'll find if you use any of the other applications here at USB, Aspire or Cactus, there's knowledge base articles where you can update your education on everything relating to those applications. So hopefully with Seascapes, we could start putting more info in there, and hopefully you can find your education there as opposed to asking questions. But that's a nice resource that I think will grow over time. Okay, so that was the help desk. Please use that when you're communicating with us. And we'll move on to the remote desktop portal. And go ahead and change the slide. Okay, like I mentioned, the remote desktop portal is the new way in which we're accessing USB applications, or at least the legacy applications. It goes through a website, and the website is this rdsportal.schools.utah.gov. And when you log in there, you will see the applications for which you have access to. In this little screenshot here, you see that Aspire, Cactus, and Seascapes are there. You will likely only see Seascapes unless you see you have access to Aspire or Cactus. And like I said, I think it works with pretty much any browser. Maybe Marlene would know or anyone else if they've run into restrictions, but I've used it on mobile, like Safari on my iPhone. I know Chrome works, and I believe Internet Explorer, or what is it called now? The new version of Internet Explorer. But anyway, so yeah, you log in, and so basically, in order to log into the RDS portal, you first must have an account enrolled, and so that comes from the Board of Ed. It's an email that we send. So up to this point, we've enrolled about, I would say, 20% of the Seascapes users. So if you've already been enrolled and logged into RDS portal, you're pretty much there. The rest of us, after this meeting, I can send out that enrollment email. So like I said, you need to have an account enrolled, and that starts with the email. So I'll send that out. Once you get that email, you'll want to open, there's going to be two emails actually. One's with a username and one's with a password. You'll want to open the password email, copy, it will look like this on the right-hand side. You'll want to copy that crazy password and then click the finish enrollment.
Oh, I swear I brought it.
Okay. And if perchance you don't see that for a while, or if you forget to do it, just search for an email from the password reset. That's where it will come from. So you can find that email in your inbox. So once you hit the finish enrollment button, it will take you to this website. It's basically an account management website for your remote desktop portal. You can then log in with the username and the password from the email, and it will allow you to enroll. So if you want to go ahead and click the next slide. So it's kind of a process. It walks you through setting up security questions, getting a PIN code, just a super secure site. And when you've gone through the process, it will drop you to this screen where it says enrolled. And that's where you'll want to log out because you've been successfully enrolled. If you continue, it kind of goes into a loop and it's easy to get lost here. So just look for that green check mark that says you're enrolled and then log out. And once again, you may want to bookmark this page if you ever need to go back and change the password, say, or do anything else with this account. You can go to the next one. Okay, now we're ready, now that we're enrolled with the remote desktop, to actually log into the remote desktop. And what this does is it connects you to the server where Seascapes is located. So it's a two-step process. The first, you would log into the server, and then we will access Seascapes. That sometimes can get confusing, but so basically you go to rdsportal.schools.utah.gov. You'll log in with the username, which is the same one from the email, and the password, which is the same one from the email. Now, if for some reason you do want to change that password, you could use the reset server that we were just talking about and change it. But it is a secure password, even though it calls it a temporary password. Only you and the email server, it's a one that's generated from the email server. So a lot of people just use that that password. Anyway, so you enter your username, which is your first dot last, and then the password from the email, and then you sign in. And once again, I would bookmark this page because it's how you'll access Seascapes going forward. So that's the remote desktop portal. And once you've signed in, you'll see the Seascapes login or the Seascapes icon. So let's go ahead and go to Seascapes. So like I mentioned, you'll see whatever resources that you have permission for. In this case, you'll have Seascapes. You just click the icon, and then you wait for it to connect. It usually takes a couple minutes. And then you basically log into Seascapes, which everyone should be familiar with at this point. It's the standard user ID. That is your Seascapes user ID and password. And then just make sure the server says production. That's the default, so you don't need to change anything there. And yeah, maybe go back one screen. We'll maybe mention something about the password. I know passwords kind of confusing sometimes. Let's see, one more screen. There you go. If you maintain your password and you update it regularly, then you won't need to call into the help desk or set a help desk ticket. You would just you can just maintain your own password. So the way to do that is when you enter your user ID and password, you also select the change password box there. And then when you log in, it'll ask you to change your password. Otherwise, you'll need to set a help desk ticket and we'll change it for you. But really, that's not the ideal way. So just remember, I think there's a 90-day password limit. So every quarter, at least try to change your password before you have to ask for help from the help desk. Okay, so that pretty much covers what I wanted to train on. So if there are questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Neil. If anybody has any questions for Neil, go ahead and type them in the chat box, and then Esther will sort them out and read a couple to Neil, and then he'll field those questions. So I'll give you about a minute.
Looks like we have one question, Neil, but it looks like it was answered about how many people could have the access to gates.
Yep.
They said only no more than one person.
Only one person per school has access or get access.
So the question was, can more than one person from a school have access to seascapes? And of course, and the answer to that is no, only one person per school will have access to seascapes. Just a quick reminder for those of you who came in a little bit late, please mute your microphone. And then also right now, we're trying to field any questions, but it doesn't look like we have any questions. Is that the only question we have?
I'm not seeing anything. We have another one, but it's not for Neil. So
Okay, well,
Okay, so I was on a phone when okay, so you're ready. Do you know how much you're paying?
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
Okay.
Hello?
I think someone just isn't muted.
Hannah's asked. She's saying her
Okay, so you want to pay just $1,000?
isn't working.
You know
She
what?
said she
You
created a
wanna
ticket.
split the difference for the $15?
All right, just to go over the ground rules again, guys, we want everybody to mute.
Or if you want me to, I can take that 1,015 and then I can just let the accountant know the 15 are for the lunch and the balance is for the tuition.
We need to have all questions just be typed in the chat form. Otherwise, it'll kind of result in chaos with how many people are in this meeting. So please, everybody, mute your microphones unless you're a host. And then if you have a question, go ahead and ask it via chat, and then we'll have those answered. So just one more quick thing. Does anybody have any more questions for Neil? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and excuse him. And I'm looking at the chat. It doesn't.
Well, there was Hannah Ashmore is saying that her login password isn't working, and so she's created a ticket. I think she's maybe wanting to see if Neil sees her ticket out there. Maybe.
Neil, are you there?
I am there or here. I'm sure we'll see her ticket come in, and I'll reach out to her if we don't see that. But I think Hannah brings up a good point. When you put up or send in a help desk ticket, try to let us know whether it's your username and password for the remote desktop portal or if it's your username and password for Seascapes. If you remember, there was the two logins. The remote desktop portal gets you to the server, and then Seascapes obviously is the Seascapes login. So when you make that help desk ticket, just make sure you describe which username and password you might be having an issue with. So I see that she said it was for Seascapes login. So we could definitely help you on that one. And once again, the account enrollment will go for the majority of you today. So you see your email that to start the enrollment process. Like I said, about 20% of you already have done this, but you'll see that the rest of you will see the email today in your inbox, and please complete it and then let us know if you have any issues.
And that email, Neil, is that going to consist of all of like the help ticket link, the portal link, and the Seascapes link, or?
No, it will just be the remote desktop portal enrollment. So if you want to search your inbox, you should already have your help desk account email and with steps on how to create a ticket. So that's in your email already. And obviously, if you can't find it, reach out to us. You may have to do that by phone.
And then you have your contact information on this slide, so they can access that at any time in the future, right?
I don't think I did. That would be helpful.
Do you want to just say it right now?
You bet. And so you could send an email. That would be the best way to app help desk. That's APP help desk at schools.utah.gov. Schools is plural and Utah is spelled out. So app help desk at schools.utah.gov.
Perfect. And it looks like it's also been typed out in the chat. So we are good there. It doesn't look like we have any more any questions for Neil at this time. I appreciate you coming in and being willing to help us out with some of this stuff, Neil. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
No, that's great. I appreciate it, Tony and Esther. It's great to be able to introduce this to everyone at once. So appreciate that opportunity.
Wonderful. We'll go ahead and let Neil go here, and then I will now share the PowerPoint training for Carson Smith. Let's see if I can get this going. Okay. All right. Looks like we're good. Can everybody see that?
Yes, I can.
You can see it, Esther? Okay, good. All righty. So we will go ahead and get started with the regular training as well now. So let me move this out of the way so I can see the full screen here. So of course, this is the Carson Smith program. Carson and his parents, Frank and Cheryl Smith, were impetus of this program. And because of his situation and a lot of petitioning, the program that we know now was signed into law in 2005 by John Huntsman. Okay, and we're just going to go over a couple things that we plan to address during this training. We want to go over the requirements of the program, the process of the application, and we're going to go from start to finish on that. Legislative audit findings. This audit happened a few years ago, but we still want to go over what those findings were, and because those are the reason why we have made some of the programmatic changes that we have made over these last couple of years. And then, of course, we're going to go over those changes, some that were recent in a year or two ago, and then some that are brand new changes. And then we're also going to discuss site reviews as well. So just to start off, we want to make sure that you have access to the codes and rules for Carson Smith. You'll notice that I have my finger on both of these links. These are in fact links. So you on your own time are encouraged to look at these and study these. And whenever you have any questions on whether or not something is an allowable cost or so forth, make sure that you go and look on the link. If you have issues or still have questions, by all means, you can contact myself and Esther to help provide a little bit more understanding. And that brings us to the next slide, which is who you should contact if you are having Carson Smith questions. Esther, I'm going to mess up your last name, Navarrete. Is that how you say it, Esther?
Yeah, that's pretty good. Navarrete.
Oh, Navarrete. All right. So you want to contact Esther. She's the primary contact, and then I'm the secondary contact. Her and I both manage the Carson Smith program, and Tammy Gear as well. And so we have our mailing address for when you want to submit applications, and our fax number as well if you want to submit via fax. So we'll just get into the program overview. And by the way, nobody gets my name right either. Zambrana, I've heard it pronounced 1,000 different ways. So I guess we're kindred spirits there. All right, so let's go right into the scholarship process. So this is a flow chart for if the student does not currently have an existing IEP. So, and it's color coded here. So these are who does what. And the first thing is the parent of the student will submit their application and all required documents to the LEA. And we will, in a few slides, show you how to determine which LEA you need to be submitting it to. So hang tight if you have that question, we'll get to it. Once the application is submitted to the correct LEA, the LEA will then date stamp the application upon the receipt, and then they start looking for the existing IEP information. The responsibility of Part D is on LEA. The LEA completes Part D, so parents do not complete Part D of the application. And then they forward this on to us, USBE, within 10 days of receipt. Then the LEA must complete a comprehensive evaluation process under Child Find within 45 school days of receipt of the application. Excuse me. And then the private school's responsibilities, the school that's the Carson Smith participating school, schedules the assessment team meeting at a mutually acceptable time and location with the parent, the LEA, and the private school. And right here, the assessment duties, this is obviously going to be multiple people that have responsibilities here. And their duties are to determine if a student would qualify for special education services and the appropriate level of services if enrolled in a public school. The private school and the LEA maintain documentation from the meeting for all students, including students that are determined ineligible. So if a student is determined ineligible, you still need to have that documentation because we do need it. And then at that point, the private school faxes or mails the ATMR to us over at the State Board of Education. Sometimes we'll have parents and whatever smell. We would prefer that private schools are the ones that are providing that documentation to us. Esther, I think I saw something on the chat. Is there a question on this slide?
Okay. Well, we're trying to help Rose get her volume on, number one. So if anybody knows how to help her on that part, because I don't. Then there's Marianne is asking, is this a new change? Because before no IEP, private school applies for assessment. If qualifies for service, then let's see, hold on. I just moved. Hold on. I just lost it. Oh, okay. Then talk about the Carson Smith, but not before the services meeting. Did that make sense? So she's wanting to know if it's a change. Okay.
No, this has not been a change that I'm aware of. It might have been a change in the sense that we've now begun enforcing it. And you'll notice that there's quite a bit of that where there's things here in this program that have been ruled but have been pretty lenient with regards to us enforcing it. And because of that legislative audit, we are enforcing some things that perhaps we let slide earlier. I'm getting a lot of static on the back. Is there like an echo? All right,
No,
I guess
I think, Tony, there is some kind of an echo. Maybe turn your computer speaker down a little bit.
okay. How about now?
I think it's okay now. There's another question here. If I'm not echoing.
Okay, yeah, you guys sound good.
It says, so another question, in some cases, the private school is not aware that, well, it might be a suggestion. In some cases, the private school is not aware that an application has been submitted to the LEA because the parents do not inform them. As a private school, scheduling the assessment team meeting is difficult when they're not aware that an application has been submitted. So
that's a good point. And I think that it would probably be prudent for when an LEA receives an application, would be a good idea to contact the private school that's listed on that application and just giving them a heads up.
Tony, isn't part of the application a letter of acceptance from the private school?
Right. So I would assume that the private school knows that an application should be on its way. I think that the question might be they may or may not be informed when it actually is submitted. So, I mean, in that case, hopefully we can have the private school and the LEA have some good communication between the two. If I was the private school and I know that I just gave a letter of acceptance and I know that the student is going to be submitting their application sometime in the near future, I would be proactive and contact the LEA and just let them know that an application is coming their way. And as a private school, I would request that maybe I get notification when it does arrive. So.
I would
Alright.
also say, Tony, does it hurt for the private school to ask the parents to give them a copy of it just so that they're aware? Is that
Yeah,
acceptable?
yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, if you're the private school, by all means, request that the parent give them a copy of the application, so that way everybody who's involved in this process is in the loop for sure.
Tony, this is Mary Ann. Is it all right if I ask my question through the mic?
Okay, go ahead, Marianne.
So our LEA was really strong about never giving a Carson Smith application out until for someone who didn't have an IEP until the determination for services was made.
Yeah, I do. I remember us kind of going over this a few months back, and that's not the right process. In fact, let me see if I can go back a slide here, if I can. So again, you'll see when we get over here to the LEA duties, they need to complete the Part D within the 10 days, and then they can do their child find within the 45 school days. But in the meantime, they do need to give us the application, regardless of whether or not the assessment has been complete. We can complete that after we've received the application. And so, yeah, that was just kind of a little bit of a jarbled thing where the LEA at the time thought that they had to have the assessment complete before the application was complete. And that's not the case. Does that answer that?
Yeah, it does. So as long as I know I'm doing it the right way, that's fine. I know I often got my hand slapped if the Carson Smith came out before the determination.
Yeah, because otherwise it would take so much time, and we time stamped things as well. We date stamp. So, in order to fulfill that 10 days of receipt, you can't have the assessment done within 10 days of you receiving it. So you have to submit it to the State Board of Education within 10 days of the time that you got it. And so, and we'll get into a little bit later here. Esther's going to go over what an application looks like that is complete, and we'll go over exactly what documents are needed and which are not needed for it to be officially complete, where we can date stamp it as complete and submitted. So anyway, I appreciate you bringing that up, and we're gonna get into that here in a little bit. So let me go ahead and just move on here. The Carson Smith scholarship process, if you already have an existing IEP, in this case, the parent would then submit the Carson Smith application and the required documents to the LEA. The LEA date stamps the application upon receipt, and then they start looking for the IEP information that already exists. And the LEA will then complete the Part D of the application and then submit it to us within 10 days of receipt. So you'll notice here, yeah, in that case, they can do it because the IEP is already here. But either scenario, you still have to submit it as the LEA. You have to submit that application to the State Board of Education within 10 days upon your receipt. So that much we want to make clear. And so the waiting for the assessment to be complete is just not feasible to meet that 10-day requirement. Okay, so let's go.
Tony, I was just gonna make a comment. Mandy in the chat box, she's just making a suggestion. Sometimes parents don't want to tell us that their student has a need prior to enrollment, so we are kept in the dark. So she's asking if either the LEA or us here at the state office could notify them that an application has been submitted. That would be helpful. So, we'll try and do that on our end. I know as we get so many, it's harder to keep track, but the one
right.
need, any type of documentation, I'm trying to go through that as well, and getting them to respond. I'll contact the school or the parents to let them know. So hopefully it'll be better in the future on that, Mandy.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Esther. Yeah, Esther and myself would probably be the two that would be able to do that. And like Esther said, we will try to do that as a courtesy. However, that will be depending on what our workload is on any given week. We do try and extend those type of courtesy heads ups if we can. But if we just are too bogged down with a higher priority things, then we won't be able to do that. But we will when we can. Thanks, Esther, for that. Okay, so then the next part of the process is what we do at the Board of Education. We run the lottery. So this is the payment process that we're going into now. We will run the lottery, which is quarterly, with all applicants that are determined eligible. Checks are sent to the private schools in the parent's name to be endorsed to the school. That may sound unnecessarily complicated, but I assure you that it is necessary due to regulations that you guys are welcome to look up in the codes. But we do have to have it where the checks are sent to the private school and then the parents have to come in and endorse it. That is to fulfill codes and rules that we cannot change. Okay, so then the parents endorse checks within 15 days of receipt by the private school. At that time, the private school will return the verification forms to us over at the Board of Education within 20 days of receipt. All right, and then for re-evaluations, the private school notifies the LEA that the student is due for re-evaluation at least 45 school days prior to expiration. And these re-evaluations are once every 3 years if it's an IEP, or 3 years from the date of the initial application. The LEA begins necessary assessments to determine if the student is still eligible and then determine the appropriate level of service. Again, we'll get into the level 1 and level 2 here in a little bit. So we'll get into the appropriate level of service stuff here in a little bit. Then the private school schedules assessment team meetings at a mutually acceptable time and location with the parent, LEA, and private school. And another thing I also want to point out later on in the training here, because of the audit that we received, that's going to include more people now, or it has been since that audit included more people and been more involved. So the assessment team meets to determine if a student would qualify for special education and services, and then the appropriate level of services if enrolled in a public school. The private school and the LEA maintain documentation from the meeting for all students, including students who are determined ineligible, as we discussed earlier. At that point, the private school will fax or mail the ATMR to us over at the State Board of Education, and we will also accept it via email if it's a secure email that's password protected. If you don't want to get into that, we still accept faxes. We're trying to get away from mail because we're trying to go digital, so we still are accepting via regular mail, but down the road that may be phased out, and fax and email might be the two main methods. Okay, so this is the flow chart that a lot of people, we get a lot of calls on where to take your application. And I would recommend that if you guys can, I would have this printed out and ready to go for any parent that wants to know where do they take their application. This is probably one of the most common questions asked. So we'll just go through the flow chart right here. If the student is enrolled in a public school or LEA in the current year or prior year, if that answer is yes, then you'll go ahead and go up to here, and then you will take the application to the district office or the charter school office where the student is enrolled or was previously enrolled. If the answer to that is no, then the next question you need to ask is if the student has an IEP currently. If the answer to that is no, then The parent of the student will take the application to the special education office at the district in which the private school is located. If the answer to the current IEP is yes, so the student does have a current IEP, then the parent of that student will take the application to the district office or charter school in which the IEP is held. Are there any questions on that? Okay, I will continue then. And I will turn some time over to Esther here. And she is the one that generally processes incoming applications. And one thing that we will get into with programmatic changes is we will not be accepting incomplete applications. You can submit them, but we will not date stamp them as submitted until they're officially complete. So Esther, I'll let you go ahead and go over what a complete application is and what it is not.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just kind of going to read over this information here, but our system currently is date driven. And again, so like Tony said, we're not going to put anything in the system as pending until we have all of the following documentation. Current application needs to be filled out by, and signed by the parents. And then Part D would need to be filled and signed out by the LEA. So we also have 2 forms of proof of residency, having the address match the same address on their application that they filled out. We actually have been receiving a few, like the driver's license, where their address is not matching the address on the application. At that point, we cannot use that as a form of residency because it's not matching. So we would need another form of proof for that. So if the LEAs notice that as well, then at that point they could probably make sure that they bring in something else that is on our eligible list. If not, again, I'll receive those. I'll contact the parents is what I've been trying to do, get them to send me another form, and it's just going to kind of sit. I mean, no, we're not going to process anything on it at all until we get all of these and they're complete. A couple forms that are not considered eligible are passports, social security cards, doctors or insurance bills. I've been getting some of those as well, so I have to turn those down and they have to send something else. So eligible forms would be considered like utility bills. Let me think. Anybody else? Hold on. Driver's license, mortgage statement, bank statements, credit card statements, just showing their address on there. They would also need a birth certificate or an ID, a Utah ID card if they don't provide this birth certificate. And then again, the letter of acceptance to the private school. If they don't have that, actually, we have been the payment form showing that they have enrolled and registered. Okay, and then once we receive all that information, we'll put that in the system and they will remain as pending until we receive the ATMR. If they actually have a current IEP, that should be sent along at the time of the application being sent. And then we'll be able to get them approved quickly at that point if they have the IEP. If not, they will stay in pending, which means that on our first deadline, August 14th, for instance, we would need to have all of the documentation we just went over submitted by August 14th. And at that point, they do have 45 days to submit the ATMR at that point. But so date driven, meaning that I'll put them in, they're in pending mode. We've received their application prior to the application deadline, but their check won't be coming until probably Q2's check. So they would get retroed for that one. Basically get that payment, I guess, if anybody has questions on that. If it's an IEP, just send that in and then we should be able to get them approved right away. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to look at the chat and see what happened here.
Yep. One question, Esther, was the birth certificate, child or parent, child. We need the child's birth certificate. just to clarify, we do need the child's birth certificate on that. Next question is, can you give an example of an acceptable secured email to use for applications? Does your office have a secure upload site? I'll answer this one. Basically, you just need to, there's through Gmail, there's ways that you can set up a secure email account, in which case you can send an email and then a separate email with the password. So the email with the sensitive information needs to be password protected, and then the password needs to be sent separately. And so there's probably multiple methods of doing that. I would just Google how to send secure emails, and you'll probably get a list of acceptable ways to do that. And so just go ahead and look that up. And I've done it a few times. It's not too bad. And then the next question is, what is our LEA? What if our LEA isn't working until after August 14th? So yeah, if you guys are, if nobody's there to submit the information, if in that case, probably gonna have to wait until the next quarter.
Well, and usually I was told, I know one of the districts, I can't remember who it was. I think like their special ed director or somebody's there to be able to sign it within 2 days of them parent actually taking it into their office.
Right.
That brings up another question from one of the districts, basically that, or maybe not a question, but just a comment that the applications need to be brought in to the districts by the private schools cannot be emailing them in, and the parents should be taking it down and talking to them. And I guess with COVID, it might be a little different, but they can contact them and they can make arrangements to bring it down so they are there. They can fax it right away and go from there at that point. That would be my suggestion.
All righty. And the only other question here is, when would the first check arrive after application on August 14th? And just wanted to have you talk more about the retro payments. So basically all we're saying is if your application is not complete and submitted before the deadline, then you will not make that particular quarter. For this instance, it would be August 14th. And so that check would not arrive for that date. And if it is determined that they were eligible for that quarter, a retro payment would be made. But that's a case by case. We have to determine whether or not a retro payment should be made. And if there's any instances in which the student should have been paid for that quarter, we will pay in the next quarter that's available. All right. I think we're good. Thanks, Esther, on helping us out with that. That's a very common thing as well. So we have made changes to the actual application. And so let's see if I can get us into there. Can everybody see this? Esther, are you able to see this?
No, I don't see anything there actually. It's
okay. Let me go ahead and reshare it. Hang on a second. Okay. How about now?
Okay, yes, I see it now.
Okay, so this is the updated application, and we'll just kind of go over some of the information here, so that way everybody knows what needs to go where. So obviously you got your spot for your primary parent and secondary parent names. If you want to sign, have both parents be able to sign the verifications and the checks and all that, then we need both parents' information and signatures. So that's important to know. Obviously, you want your student's name, your birthday, age, gender, street address, and parent email. All this is required information. We need to have this information. We need one of these three: home phone number, work phone number, cell phone number. We need some sort of phone number. And then we need the district of residence. So where your house is located, where you reside, what district is that in? and then the name of the eligible private school that your student will be attending. And then you need to put in, if your student attended a previous school, you need to put that in right here. And then you need to indicate whether or not that was a public or private, district, charter school. And then this is also important right here. If you can see where my finger my cursor is at, is we need to know the student's grade level for this application, and then need to indicate whether or not the student's going to be a half-day participant or a full-day participant. And if you have any commentary here.
I just want to point in, Tony,
Go for it.
yeah, we really need that half day, full day check marked on that, because we're not getting, even when it's the preschool, I'm not seeing it, and then it affect their funding if it's not checked. So please start filling that out.
Yes, that, and we are not going to consider it complete unless you do indicate whether or not it's full day or half day. That is very pertinent information. Thanks for bringing that up, Esther. And that seems to have been kind of a common theme, that people just either click on it and don't quite get it, or what, but we're having issues with people not clicking on whether or not it's full or half day. So thanks for bringing that up. Next part is part B on the eligibility checklist. This is very important because you can check these boxes, but if we don't have the actual information, then we're not going to consider it complete. So make sure that you go through these. You need 2 forms of proof of Utah residency from the approved list, and Esther already went over what's approved forms of proof of residency. So make sure before you check that box that you actually do have those documents that you're going to add to the application. Next is proof of the student's age. So this is going to be a photocopy of the birth certificate of the student or a Utah identification card. So that's why we need that information, is so that way we can prove the student's age. Next is documentation of enrollment or an admission to an eligible private school. So this is the acceptance letter from the private school. So we need all those 3 before we can consider this application complete. So make sure that you actually do attach that information to the application. Part C, you're going to check these areas and acknowledge and make these acknowledgements or authorizations. And so this is to be completed by the parent or guardian, and it requires that the following statements be acknowledged by the parent. And so they can initial each of these. Sometimes we've seen people put check marks. Please do initial it, put your initials there. A private school may not provide the same level of special education services that are provided in a public school. So the parents acknowledging and accepting that the level of services may or may not be the same as what's available to them from public school. The next acknowledgement is that they will assume full financial responsibility for the education of their student and if they accept the scholarship. 3, acceptance of this scholarship has the same effect as a parental refusal to consent to special education services pursuant to Code 614A1 of the Individuals with Disability Education Act. So again, you'll just notice that all these things is making sure that the parent is aware of the stipulations of the program and has accepted those. 4, scholarship recipients will remain eligible to participate in equitable services offered by the local school district pursuant to 612A10 of the Individuals with Disability Education Act. The parent then acknowledges that their child may return to public school at any time, and also that the parent has received an explanation of and understands the capacity of the private school to address the special needs of their student. So basically, we just need to make sure that the parent understands the agreement that they've made with the private school and the services that are being provided. And then the parent's signature page right here on the next page. Again, we kind of went over this, but there has to be a signature here from at least one parent. And if you want both parents to be able to sign off on the checks, then we need the signatures of both parents. The application will be considered complete though if we only have one parent's signature and date. Did I see any questions pop up there?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I don't know if we've missed them or not, but the one was, if the student had an IEP for the academic school year 2018-19 and enrolled in a private school for the 2019-2020, is the IEP considered current? The answer would be
Let's see, if the student had an IEP,
yes.
well, if it's 18-19, then it should be good for 3 years. So it should be, just based on that information, it should be considered current.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is Tammy. So eligibility is good for 3 years from the last date of eligibility. Unless there was an IEP that was, they were then found not eligible, that IEP would stand. IEPs are typically done for a year. You still need to have the ATMR, but if they had an IEP, you can use the information from that IEP in your ATMR to determine services and things like that. And then that eligibility is good for 3 years from the date of the eligibility.
Thanks for clarifying that, Tammy. Yeah, unless there's something more recent that shows that they're not eligible anymore, then yes, we recognize that as current. So,
Tony, another question that came up is, do they put the district our school is located in, or the one that where they live? And if you went back to that slide showing where they send it, it's going to depend on if they were in a public school the previous year.
right.
Go back to
Yeah,
that slide.
So to answer that question, just refer back to that flow chart and you'll get your answer. And it just depends on a few variables. And if you follow that flow chart, you'll be able to figure out where the application needs to go.
Another question, it's so the parent who signed the application is a parent that has to sign the check. I'm assuming that's
Correct.
so.
Yep. Absolutely. So if you want to be one of the parents that is able to sign for the check, then your signature has to be on the application. The parent who signed the application, if there's only one, that's the only parent that is able to authorize the check. So
Another question, well, and another question based off what Tammy said earlier, eligibility is good for 3 years. IEP is a 1 year, right? She's asking.
Eligibility is good for 3 years. IEP is good for 1 year. If the IEP is expired but the eligibility is still good, then you would still take it to where you would go by where that IEP was. So let's say it'd been 15 months since the IEP, but the eligibility was still good, then you could use that IEP as your starting point. Does that make sense?
yeah, thanks, Tammy. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move forward, and if there's not any more. So right below the signatures, you'll see that there's kind of a quick summary of that flow chart right here. So now the parents have signed this application. They don't need to fill out any more because now the other parties are going to be filling out the other stuff. Now the parent says, where do I take this application? Well, you can go ahead and read right here below the signatures. It says, submit this form to the special education department of the district or charter school where your student is currently enrolled or was enrolled in the previous year. If your student was at a charter school, take this form to that school. If your student was at a district school, take this form to the district central office. If your student did not attend public school during that time, take this form to the district central office in which the private school is geographically located. So there you go. So I believe this is one of the add-ons that we put onto this new application because that was a commonly asked series of questions. So now we'll move to part D. This is going to be completed by the LEA, and we'll just go over these things that the LEA needs to do. So this application must be date stamped by the district or charter school and forwarded to the State Board of Education with all the required documents within 10 days of receipt. So I know we're kind of being redundant, but it really is important that that everybody understand that. And so then the LEA will go ahead and answer these series of questions. Was the student enrolled in a public school during the previous or current year? Yes or no? If yes, we need that SSID number. So go ahead and put that in here. Was the student evaluated for special education services? Yes or no? If yes, what was the date of the evaluation? And also, if yes, was the student found eligible? Does the student have a current IEP? Yes or no? If you answer no to C, then you'll go ahead and stop and go to question 4. If it's yes, then the latest re-evaluation date on the IEP, you'll put it here, and then you'll enter the classification right here in this box. And then you'll move on to the question number 3, which is what is the average amount per day of special education and related services provided as determined by the most recent IEP. And then if it's kindergarten to 12, you will either mark that it's 179 minutes or less per day, or 180 minutes or more per day on average. And we will have Tammy get into that a little bit more as we continue this training. So just kind of put a little pin on that. We'll get more in depth of what exactly that means. And also if the student's in preschool, same thing, except for now it's 89 minutes on average a day or less, or 90 minutes or more on average a day. And then the 4th question, has a student been enrolled in your district or charter school during the current year? Yes or no? Is the private school located within your boundaries? Yes or no? And then once you finish all of that, we need to have the representative of the district or charter school and then print the name. And if we have 2, we'll do both. Yeah, we got that, and then we'll sign that, and then the LEA will take the entire packet, so all the supporting documentation and the application itself, and you can either fax it to us, provide it to us via secured email, or you can do physical mail. We would prefer faxing or secured mail. So let me go back to our training. Give me a second here. Okay, is everybody able to see the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so now we're going to get into the assessment team meeting record, or ATMR. So it needs to be filled out completely. It needs to be faxed or mailed in by the private school. So you'll notice that some of this information is going to be redundant. Needs to be kept on file by the LEA and the private school, both the LEA and private school need to have their copies. It needs to be completed every 3 years. And we will mail you guys reminders 45 days in advance of when a student that is in your school, when their eval is coming up. So we do mail you guys reminders. It must be submitted even when the student is found not eligible for special education services. We have to be updated. Otherwise, it could result in overpayments for funding that they were no longer eligible for. And so I'm not going to get into the ATMR form, but you can go ahead and click here, and it'll provide you the updated form, so that way you can get going on that for students. Eligibility determination. I believe this is where Tammy's going to start going over some of these slides. And Tammy, do you want to share your screen, or do you want me just to keep it on mine and then click on it when you're ready?
I'm gonna share mine.
Okay.
So hold on. Okay, can everyone see this okay?
Yep, I can.
All right. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name's Tammy Gear, and I am the coordinator over the fiscal and data in student supports, which includes special education, and Carson Smith Scholarship program now falls under my purview. My background is I am a school psychologist. And so before I was ever the coordinator over this program, I worked with the legislative auditors looking at the Carson Smith program, and we found they found a lot of issues. So we're going to talk about those, and I will try and explain some of those things that will hopefully help you understand some things. Okay, so Tony, can you see that I now have a new thing showing? I just want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Are you there? Hello?
I can see it, Tammy.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so first of all, you must use the ATMR form. That is a required form when you're determining eligibility. Somebody said earlier, well, we were told not to submit the application until eligibility has been determined. And like Tony said, that is not the case, that you submit the application, then you get the eligibility going. And just so that it is noted, the district, the LEAs have 45 school days to complete the eligibility determination. So that kind of will help you know that. It is completed by the LEA, but with the team members there. So if there's not a current IEP, then there has to be a new evaluation done. Or if there's not a current eligibility, you have to do a separate evaluation for this. And then again, eligibility must be redone every 3 years, and that has to be done before that 3 years is up. So considering that there's 45 school days that it needs to be done by, what you need to make sure is that you are backing. So if it's due May 15th, for example, you need to make sure that you have counted back 45 school days to get all those permissions in place to give you that full 45 days if you're an LEA to get that evaluation completed. If you don't realize it's coming up and you don't provide those 45 days, you're going to have school psychologists and evaluators that are scrambling to try and get it done by that 3-year date. So make sure that you get that in time. Okay, so to be eligible for the Carson Smith, you have to satisfy all 3 parts of the eligibility test for special education. First, the student must be between the ages of 3 and 21. And if you have any questions about eligibility rules and how things are determined, this is a link in the PowerPoint that you can see the special education eligibility rules. So you know that special education rules have been recently updated and they are about to go in front of the board for full approval. So there may be some changes in the special education rules, but eligibility, there's a few things that have changed. So use this for now questions, but know that a new one is on the way within the next month or 2. Okay, so when we talk about eligibility for special education, we talk about 3 requirements or 3 prongs, and that in order to be eligible for special education, you have to meet each of those 3 requirements or prongs. The first requirement or prong is defined by statute. The student must meet the definition of one of the 13 categories of disabilities. If you have a disability that is not one of those 13 categories, it wouldn't count. However, under those 13 categories, we do have other health impaired. So things that aren't specifically listed often can be caught under other health impaired. The definitions, there's a link here for the Utah State disability definitions. We're not going to go into all of those right now, but just know that those are defined in there. So here are the different qualifying disabilities, and I will put them up kind of quickly so you can see them. Okay, so here are all of them. 8, no, one more. Autism. Okay, so these are the 13 different categories. Please note that children before the younger than 8 years old could have the qualifying disability of developmental delay. Oftentimes when students have speech issues combined with other things, and we know that they're delayed at a young age, we don't know which of these categories really fits best. So oftentimes you put it under developmental delay, just knowing that before they are 8 years old, you have to have an eligibility meeting that would find them eligible under a different category. But these are the different categories that are qualifying disabilities. And again, other health impairment, let's say they have ADHD, anxiety, depression, things like that. It may fall under there, could fall under emotional disturbance, but those are the categories that are qualifying disabilities. Please note that a diagnosis from a doctor is not the same as a classified educational qualifying disability. They are not the same, okay? You may go have a doctor that writes a note that says this child has ADHD or this child has anxiety, okay? That is good. That information can be used as part of the eligibility determination, but just because you have a diagnosis does not mean that they qualify under one of those disabilities. The team must consider any outside evaluation, including a diagnosis. Now, that they must consider it. It does not mean that they have to take that whole diagnosis and say, well, Dr. X says this, and so we have to determine them eligible. That is not the case, but you have to consider that. You have to read that. You have to consider that as part of this whole eligibility test. So again, medical doctor's diagnosis does not determine special education eligibility. Sometimes we'll have a doctor that writes a note that says this student has ADHD and should be served in special education. That's lovely, but it does not make them automatically eligible for special education. The key here is that the diagnosis must impact the student's academic and or functional performance. Yes, they have ADHD, but if they manage it okay and it's not affecting their educational performance or functional performance, it does not mean that it's a disability. So it has to impact that. Is there a question or someone just need to be muted? Okay. Second requirement is we have to look at academic achievement, okay, and functional performance. This disability has got to affect how they achieve academically and how they function in school, okay? Some people say, well, they have anxiety, but when we look at their test scores on a test, they're doing fine, but the anxiety is so severe that they are unable to attend school more than 25% of the time. So, academically, they may be okay, but that's a functional performance thing. So it has to affect this. And we have to look at their developmental markers. Are they on track for their developmental markers? For younger kids, you can't really look at academics, for example, because they haven't really learned. A 3-year-old isn't expected to know the alphabet and their letter sounds and counting and things like that. But are they reaching their developmental markers? When we look at students with a speech language impairment, that's one that are they where they should be for that speech? So that's one of the things that we can look at. We also can look at emotional regulation. When we look at emotional disturbance, if there's some severe behavior and emotional regulation that is affecting what happens at school, then that might mean that they are eligible. Please note that sometimes you'll have parents that the kid is out of control at home and is not doing well at home at all, But at school, we don't see that. That does not meet that second requirement if it is not affecting their academic and their schooling performance. I hope that makes sense. And then social relationships. So social relationships, if they are having a hard time at school with their peer relationships and stuff, and it's so severe that it's affecting their overall school performance, then that may classify. But again, we're going to go to the third prong. So this is the second requirement that it has to have. These are the areas that they might meet that second requirement in. Okay, and I will answer questions in just a minute about these. And then communication. Are they able to communicate with the teacher, with their peers? And that, so all of those are the things we look at. So first, do they have a disability? Second, does it affect one of these areas? Okay, it must adversely affect academic and or functional performance, one of these areas. Okay, that's our second requirement. So third requirement, and again, in order to be eligible for special education, they have to meet all three requirements. And I'll explain a little bit of the difference. So special education, defined as specially designed instruction required for the student to access and make progress in the general education curriculum. Okay, specially designed instruction. So let me see if I can go back for just a minute. So let's say we have a student. Okay, we have a student that has one of these disabilities. And let's say, for example, it's a speech language impairment. Okay, but let's say what their speech language impairment is. They have some speech difficulties that they have a lisp or something like that, really not pronounced, but they do have one, and they may need some speech services. Okay, but the question then goes is it affecting their academic performance? Are they able to communicate with their teacher? Is their teacher able to understand them? A slight speech language impairment may need some speech language services, but is it affecting their academic or functional performance? So again, they have to have specially designed instruction to access that. And then related services is defined as a service required for the student to benefit from specially designed instructions. Okay, so that may be occupational therapy, that might be physical therapy, speech. Maybe if they have a visual impairment, they need orientation and mobility services. Different things like that are considered related services that they have to have in order to benefit from those specific, this specially designed instruction. They have to require special education and related services as a result of the disability. So they have to need the special education or the related services in order to access the general education curriculum. Okay. Okay. So I just want to make sure. Do we have any questions before I go on about these three things, these three prongs? Now, if they only meet two of the requirements, so they have a disability and it's affecting their academic performance, but all they need is accommodations to fix it. So a student has ADHD, but academically they're doing fine. All the other areas they're doing fine, but they need extended time to take some tests, and maybe they need an occasional break that they take. But other than that, they do okay. They then are not eligible for special education. They may be eligible for a 504 plan that outlines all of those accommodations they need. But if they only need accommodations, they do not require special education or related services, then they are not eligible. So are there any questions? I can't see my screen, so I'm not sure if there are questions.
So one of them, and you answered it, but I'm just going to go over it for everybody. It says, so do they need to fill out all the second requirements in order to be eligible? And then, but you had said they just, let's see, I guess.
They have to meet all three of those requirements to be eligible. That makes sense?
Say it again.
They have to meet. Oh, so, okay. Yeah, in requirement 2. So what they're asking is, do they have to meet all, let me go back a couple of screens, hold on. I think what the question was, do they have to meet all of these requirements for the number 2? No, they have to just meet one of those. But one of those has to affect, academic or functional performance. Does that make sense?
Yes, and then another statement is they have to meet all 3 prongs.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Very good. Okay. Sorry, I'm choking a little bit. I have no water here, so we're going to try and plow through this. Okay. All right. Okay, so number 2, there's some eligibility restrictions. You do not qualify for special education or the Carson Smith Scholarship if the determinant factor is a lack of appropriate instruction in reading, including the essential components of reading instruction. So if you have a student who has been pulled out of school for 3 years and they're way far behind because they haven't had the schooling for 3 years, that does not make them eligible for special education. You also cannot qualify them if the determinant factor is they have a limited English proficiency. Now, when you're doing the evaluation, the evaluating team would have to separate out what is the delay caused by limited English proficiency or special education needs. And I'm not going to go really deep into this. The districts would know this, but just so that you kind of understand that. So in order to separate the two, for example, a specific learning disability from what is an English language learner's delay, you would have to compare that English language learner to somebody who was at about the same time with exposure to the English language and things like that, that they are not in line with where they should be based on that English proficiency. That's a little bit more complicated. The LEA, the people doing the evaluation should understand that, just so you know. And then again, you could access the special education rules to understand these eligibility restrictions. Okay, so again, this is the IDA versus the 504 eligibility part. So Section 504 plans do not qualify a student for a Carson Smith program. So if they don't meet all 3 of those prongs and they just need accommodations, they do not qualify for Carson Smith. So that's really important to remember. If a student has a disability but does not require specially designed instruction, the student may be eligible for a Section 504 plan. So, for example, maybe they need some occupational therapy for something, but they don't need specially designed instruction for academic, or they need physical therapy, but it's not affecting their academic performance. That's one of those cases. So a Section 504 plan is for a student who has a disability or is regarded as having a physical or mental impairment that significantly interferes with one of life's major activities. So major activities are functions such as caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and working. Again, having difficulties with learning is a major life activity, but do they need specifically designed instruction, or do they need just some accommodation? All right, so reevaluations. So the assessment must review and consider the following information. First of all, evaluations and information provided by the parents or the adult students. Okay, so the information that they give you, you have to consider that. Current classroom, local, or state assessments, observations by teachers and related service providers. And again, some things are required for that special education eligibility. For example, under specific learning disability, there has to be an observation of the student in a classroom as part of that eligibility. And they also have to consider whether the student continues to have a disability and the educational needs of the student. A student who qualifies 1 year for special education, the idea behind special education is we get the students specially designed instruction, we help them to catch them up to their general education peers, and then they are released from special education. Special education is not meant to be a lifetime thing. The idea, sometimes students need special education their entire educational career, but in some cases, you're able to get them caught up, and especially if there's less severe disabilities, then you're able to catch them up with their general ed peers, and then they would not be, when the reevaluation comes up, they may not continue to be eligible. The present levels of academic achievement and related developmental needs of the students. So you have to look at where they are currently academically. Are they behind? Are they significantly behind in their peers in their academic achievement? And then whether the student needs special education related services, or in the case of a reevaluation, whether the student continues to need special education and related services. One of the issues that we have had due to the COVID is that having in-person assessments can sometimes be difficult or impossible to conduct. I know that in some cases of reevaluations, districts are way behind because some of it. There's a lot of questions about this, but at this time, USBE will honor the protocol each district has established for assessments. So if, for example, the district feels like they cannot do an in-person cognitive assessment, they may, in their protocols, say we will use functional assessments to determine that for now, and maybe not do an in-person established. But we are looking at the protocol each district has established for those assessments. So it will be based on the district that is in charge of your assessment, what their protocols are. Any questions up to this point? Okay, my LEA indicated that remote learning due to COVID may have resulted in a lack of appropriate instruction. It seems that it could impact all of our new. Yes, Sarah's asked the question about remote learning. That may have resulted in a lack of appropriate instruction. The thing is, so let's say they were doing remote learning from March to June. So March to April, May, June, 3 months. What that may seem like is, maybe they are, instead of being a year and a half behind, 18 months behind, they would be 21 months behind their peers. You're still going to have to show a pretty significant delay in order to qualify for special education. If the student had been in school for 3 years and the school has not taught them how to read, if they have been in school and attending school, and let's say that the school wasn't really providing what they needed, if they're that far behind and they've been attending school, there's a lot of things, that's a factor that you could consider, right? But if they were fully attending and still had not learned to read, that's a pretty big red flag. So, let me talk to you about a little bit of what we found from our legislative audit so you understand why we have made some of the changes. And let me get this back up. Okay. So when the legislative auditors, so a little bit of background on this, when the legislature gives money to a program, every once in a while the legislature says, hey, we need to know, is this money being useful? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? And is it worth us continuing to fund this program? So they have a legislative audit committee that comes in and they look at the overall program. So when they came in, they examined records, student records from 2015, 16, and 17. They looked at also the way the lottery was run. They looked at the whole program for those 3 years. They reviewed all aspects of the program from the application, receipt of verification of deposit letters, and it was completed July 17th of 2018. 2 years ago. If you would like to see the full legislative audit report, there's a link in the PowerPoint that you can go to that, but I'm just going to highlight some of the things that were discovered. First of all, their first finding was that student eligibility needed to be more precise. When we were looking at all the student records, and one of the reasons that I was pulled into helping the legislative auditor was, as a school psychologist, I know how to look at eligibility. I know how to look at the testing, so they had me go in with them, and we had some other people help and look at these at the records and how people were. Well, one of the things that they found was that a greater portion of Carson Smith students are classified as self-contained, so that's that level 2, 180 minutes or more than the public school population. So 38% at the time of Carson Smith students were on a level 2 versus only 10.8% of students enrolled in public schools, which says that a large portion of these students are in level 2 compared to the public school students. And that was their first finding. And it needs to be more, a whole lot closer of numbers, okay? And in order to determine the right thing, they also felt that additional school personnel should participate in that ATMR meeting. That when we don't have the right people in the meeting, it is difficult to determine what level they should be, if they're eligible or not. And when you look at the people that are required to be in a district special education meeting, there are a lot of people that need to be involved in that meeting. The related services that might be needed, special education teacher, a general education teacher, someone who can interpret evaluation results, an administrator. So there's a lot of people that have to be in a special education meeting. And that was one of their findings, was that we need additional school personnel to participate in the ATMR meeting. For one thing, to make sure that student eligibility is more precise. They also said that additional documentation should be submitted in addition to the ATMR. So some of you may have noticed that we are asking for some additional documentation, including some of those evaluation results, so that we can back up if the ATMR says they need to be a level 2, that additional documentation has to back up what that decision is. And so that's what the legislative auditors found for legislative audit finding number 1. Number 2 was that the scholarship award process needed to be more consistent, which meant that required documentation was not submitted timely. There were some cases, and we've had to go back and correct this, where students were approved for the scholarship and checks were sent out before all of the documentation was submitted. And that becomes a problem, because if then it is determined that they're not eligible and a check's gone out, then we're requiring people to pay that back, and that's a problem. 74% of sample payments had an application submitted after the deadline. That's a huge portion. And when this program was being run before, I will admit that there were times that we sent things through even though the application had not been submitted on time. And because of this audit finding, we cannot do that anymore. Applications often were incomplete without all of the documentation that was needed. 14% of sample payments had an incomplete application, never completed. That's a big issue. And that level of service changes were applied retroactively. And so if a child is a level 1 and you decide that they need to be a level 2, and you decide it in the middle of quarter 2, for example, that service level goes forward, not backwards. So just because during quarter 2 you say, hey, we've decided now that their services are greater, they need to be a level 2, that does not go back should not go back retroactively to the beginning of quarter 1. So 14% of sample payments revealed improperly applied level changes to the beginning of the year. So if you decide that they later on need to be a level 2, it does not go back retroactively. Now I need to say a caveat here that we have had some that we've had the completed application, the ATMR has been submitted, and they are saying that it needs to be a level 2. We are now looking at that, and I think the next one, no, let me go back. We are now looking at if a application comes in as a level 2 and the documentation only supports a level 1, we will submit that and push that through as a level 1 pending more documentation. But let's say the application was turned in time, but there wasn't enough backup documentation to say that a level 2 should qualify. And then we ask for documentation. You send the documentation, and the documentation says that at the time of the ATMR, there was documentation that said it should have been level 2, it just wasn't submitted. Then we will go back retroactively and we will change that to a level 2 if the documentation indicates that eligibility was for the date. We would go back to that when that documentation shows that level 2 was correct. Okay, finding number 3 was that the parent verification process is ineffective. 11% of checks deposited contained an improper signature. So the verification of the VRD verification, anyway, can't remember what VRD stands for, but that verification form contained an improper signature on 10% of checks deposited, or was missing signatures on 3% of checks deposited. So checks were deposited with no signatures at all. Up to $387,000 of payments may have been improper. So here are the different program changes due to these legislative audit findings. From now on, level 2 applications, renewals, or changes that are from a level 1 to a level 2 are now being reviewed. And if that documentation does not support a level 2, it will be approved as a level 1 pending receipt of additional documentation. If that additional documentation still does not show that it should be a level 2, they will be continued to be funded at that level 1. So we have a lot of questions about calculations of minutes, so I needed to clarify this, and this is for special education as well as Carson Smith, so we need to really make some clarifications here. Services used to calculate the 180 minutes or more would include specially designed instruction in literacy, numeracy, behavior supports, etc., and related services. So that could be speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, etc. That is what is used to calculate those 180 minutes. So the question you have to ask is, what is this service providing to the student? Okay, and let me give you an example. An aid's time where an aid was assigned to support a student when it's needed, but who is providing direct service to the student. Let me re-clarify this. Aid's time who is assigned to support a student when needed, but who is not providing direct services to the student would not count towards minutes. So maybe have an aide who is assigned out to the playground or into the lunchroom or in the classroom in case they were needed, but they're not providing actual directed students services. So the student's listening to the teacher, and the teacher is providing the instruction, and the aide is just there in case they're needed. That does not count towards that 180 minutes, right? But let's say the aide's in the classroom, and most of the time they're just sitting in the classroom, but there's 4 15-minute chunks that the aide actually is talking to the student and providing direct services and showing them, again, maybe re-going over the instructions, then that time could count. Typically students, and this is a big question that comes up, and maybe this will help people understand what that 180 minutes or more means. Typically students in public schools who have 180 minutes or more of services have more significant disabilities and require modified curriculum and extensive related services. So they are typically receiving, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes they are in a classroom, a self-contained classroom that has special education students, special education teacher. They may go out to the general education for things like music or art or PE or recess or lunch, but they are in a classroom that is typically has a modified curriculum and extensive related services. So you need to think about that when you're looking at a level 2. If they were in the district, and districts maybe can help explain this to the parents and the private schools better. If they were in the district, are you going to see them mostly in that kind of service modality where they have a special education teacher for the majority of their day? Very important to remember. Also remember that services that are provided weekly, monthly, or yearly must be divided by the total minutes in school to determine daily minutes. So if a student is receiving 30 minutes of speech services in a week, this only adds 6 minutes to that daily minute calculation. If they have an occupational therapist that is only seeing them once a year to check in and see how things are going and maybe giving some support to the teacher on how to support, then that would have to be divided by the yearly minutes that student is in school. So hope that helps some. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Tony so that he can go on from here. Are there any questions though before we go on?
There's one on the chat there. Why do the numbers need to have parity for level of services? Would it not be predictable that students with higher level of services would be seeking other educational options? I'm not sure why the different ratios from the general school population is problematic.
So here's one of the things that I think will help answer that. One of the things about special education is special education has to provide a free and appropriate public education. That doesn't mean that it has to provide top line, the very, very best of services. It has to provide an appropriate. There is a recent court case, and we look at what is needed for them to access the general education curriculum. That is different than a parent who says, hey, you know, I want extra speech services for my student because although they're doing okay in school, they still have this little bit of a lisp that I think is going to bother them later on in life. And so I want to get more speech services so that we can get that corrected. That's fine, but that I think sometimes when we talk about special education and you know, I think this makes it a little bit more clear is a free and appropriate public education may be a well, we used to say a Pinto, right? But many of you probably don't know what that kind of a car is. But when we're looking at cars, you have a car, you have a just a basic car, right? A Ford Escort, okay? Special education has to provide the Ford Escort. Does not have to provide a Cadillac with all of the bells and whistles. So when we look at that, we have to equate these levels with the same as what would be available in the public school and those levels. That answer that question.
There's another question about part-time students. If they're part-time, they're not dual enrolled or enrolled in any other option. They just, he says, I remember reading that we must notify Carson Smith if students miss more than 10 days. Are part-time students ineligible for Carson Smith?
So Esther, you could probably answer that. They cannot be dual enrolled. So, maybe parents are homeschooling him half the day and they're in the private school half the day. I am not sure how that works for, and Tony, can you answer that one?
That would be Tony to answer that one.
He might be muted. Are you still muted, Tony? His screen's up. Tony, we're not hearing you. Hold on a minute. Is he muted? He's not muted. Tony, it doesn't look like you're muted, but we are not hearing you. Can you maybe type an answer in the chat box? You're up next, so you need to figure out. We will come back to that question later about part-time. How about that? Are there any other questions, Esther, that you see?
No.
Okay. Any questions that you have in the future, you certainly, I am going to put my email in the chat box. About these, if you ever have any questions about eligibility, those kind of questions, you can email me. I can answer more about that because I understand it from the school psychology perspective. Oh, he's not sure why we can't hear him. I'm not sure either, Tony. Alex, can you help us here?
Tony, you may have to sign off and come back in.
All right. Well, we're waiting for Tony. Anything else you want to talk about? We can certainly talk about that. What I did want to make note that yes, if a student misses more than 10 days, you do need to notify them that they're missing school days. And lack of attendance often will put kids behind, and then you have to wonder, are they behind because of lack of attendance, or are they behind because of a learning a disability? But you also have to understand, okay, 10 days, missing more than 10 unexcused days. There are some kids with disabilities that are going to miss a lot of school due to because of their disability. Maybe they have some medical things going on that they are missing school because of. Then in that case, they may need some services in the home. If they were in the district, for example, and they were missing school because of medical reasons, especially during COVID, you may find students who are immunocompromised, they can't come to school. So they are missing a lot of school. if they were in the district, if they were in an LEA, they would have to have a meeting, an IEP meeting, and look at about changing placement. Do they need some home services? And so private school may need to look at that too. While the parents aren't guaranteed that, that may be one way that you meet those needs. But if they're not attending the school and you're not providing any services, then the question is, why are you getting tuition, right? But if they're not attending for those kind of reasons and you're providing services, that also is a way to count those. So, Tony, are you back with us and can we hear you? I'm still not hearing you, Tony. I'm not sure what's going on. How about if I, so Tony, while you're getting that figured out, how about if I kind of keep going down here and maybe I can keep going for a little bit until we can get him figured out. And Tony, when you get in there, just holler. So one of the other program changes due to the legislative audit findings is that new parent application includes information and signatures of two parents. Again, remember, if you want both parents to be able to sign those checks, you need to have those signatures on the application so that we have a comparison of correct signatures. Oh, Tony is changing my thing. Let me see if I can share my screen while he's fixing things, and I'll to here. Tony, when you're there, let me know, and I'm just going to keep going. Okay, LEAs will now be required to submit supporting documentation again with that ATMR so that we have that, so that we know that they do truly qualify and that the level is correct. There has to be a consent. Oh, is that Tony?
No, that was me. I was just going to make sure that that is for level 1 and level 2s. I mean, right?
Okay.
The documentation,
Yes.
we want to make sure we're getting not just the 2-page ATMR, we're actually getting, even if it's a level 1, right?
Correct. Very, very good. Yes, we need to have that supporting documentation for both levels. There also needs to be a consent to evaluate form included. For a district to do that evaluation, parents must have signed a consent to evaluate form. That should be part of the documentation that is submitted as part of that.
Can you guys hear me now?
Now we can hear you. You want to take back over, Tony?
Wonderful. I apologize, guys. I don't know why all of a sudden it was making it so I couldn't talk there. So, okay, let me go ahead and share my screen and get back going.
I will stop sharing mine.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize, you guys. A little error there. Well, okay. So, is this where we were?
Before you go, yeah. No, we were one slide before that.
Okay. All right, hang on.
Yeah, that's the one.
This is the one?
Yep, that's the one.
Okay. Sorry, I kind of had to pay attention to what I was doing, so I'm not sure where you left off, Tammy.
We were on a copy of the student's previous IEP, but there is a question about that they thought the supporting documentation was required to be submitted by private school with the ATMR. So Esther, you want to answer that? It really is submitted with the ATMR, but the district needs to provide that with the ATMR for the private school to submit. Does that sound correct? Just want to make sure I'm saying that correctly.
Did you say Esther or Tony?
I think Esther would know who actually submits that. Esther?
Well, I usually get the ATMRs, the renewals usually come from the private schools.
Okay, so yeah, private schools, you need to make sure you have that documentation when you're submitting that ATMR to us.
All right. Okay, so then we're on the ATMR meeting will now include at least one special education personnel from the LEA. private school representative, related service providers as needed, parents of the student, and qualified personnel from the LEA to interpret assessment results. And then at a minimum, we need 2 LEA representatives, 1 private school representative, and the parent or parents all need to be present, and they need to sign the ATMR. Let's keep going. Okay, some other additional changes. Some of these are brand new and others are, within the last year or two. No retroactive payments will be provided when levels of services change. I believe that one we've had for a little bit now. So obviously if somebody in the middle of the quarter goes from a level 2 to a level 1 or a level 1 to level 2, then we're not going to be doing mid-quarter payment changes. Next is the application will not be considered submitted until the application is complete. And Esther did a thorough job of explaining to you what it means to be complete when it's submitted. And so we will not be date stamping those the day before. And so actually, I'm going to get into that here in a second. If an application is submitted before the deadline but is missing items needed to be considered complete, the application will not be considered submitted within the deadline. And and here's a good example. We've had this quite a bit, where we get an application that is missing just 1 or 2 documents, but it was submitted before the deadline, and then they provide the rest of it, a few days after the deadline. And so this is the one thing that we're trying to avoid for sure. So I'll give you an example of this one. So let's say that the quarterly deadline to submit is on the 10th of this month, and then we receive an application before the deadline on the 7th. However, the application is missing the school's acceptance letter and a proof of residency. After the Board of Education, contacts the school or the parents, then we receive the missing items on the 12th. So now that's after the deadline. In this example, the application will be considered complete on the 12th, and this will be considered the submission date of the application. And so it will be considered past the deadline for that quarter and not be considered for that quarterly check run. So we really are going to be cracking down on this because it has been fairly often that we're getting submissions that are incomplete, so that way they can meet a deadline. But then by the time we get all the information to where we would consider it complete, it's after the deadline. And so we will not be considering any applications fully submitted until they've been submitted 100% complete. And we would really encourage everybody to, when they do submit, just wait until you have all the information and then provide the full, complete submitted application. All right, any questions on that?
There was a couple from the last, talking about the ATMR. If the LEA can both interpret results and is a special ed personnel, will that be acceptable as the, and also if the LEA can interpret the results and is the special ed personnel, can they do both? That was off of the slide from the ATMRs.
That's probably more of a Tammy question.
Typically, you really need, so in a real IEP meeting, you would have the school psychologist who could interpret the report and a special ed teacher. I don't believe that they really can be, they can't take the place of both those rules. So Tony, again, go back to how many people have to be in the meeting so I could see that. Sorry.
Not a problem.
Okay. So 2 LEA representatives. So you would have to have the person from the LEA who can interpret it and 1 other person. They cannot fill both of those LEA representative positions. So you may have an administrator and a school psychologist. You may have a special education teacher and a school psychologist. I believe the districts often have 1 district person that's over the program, and then they would have like a school psychologist. So there has to be two separate people, and so they really can't both roles. Does that make sense? They can't. You still have to have two people,
Yep, two warm bodies.
two warm bodies.
Okay, let me get back to the slide that we were on. So some other updates. This one's kind of just letting you know that there's a non-change that recently occurred. So the board recently ruled against a proposed waiver. The waiver that was proposed was asking to extend the deadline for the parent of a student participating in the Carson Smith program to indicate the student's continued enrollment in the program. And the deadline for that has been May 1st, and they were asking for the deadline to be extended to June 15th for upcoming years. And they ruled against that. So all this means is that nothing has changed, and parents will still be expected to sign that sheet indicating the intentions of the student's enrollment, and that will remain on May 1st. So that was something that a few parents might have been interested in, and just wanted to update everybody that that date will remain the same. Okay, just a quick example of reporting tuition correctly. This is just to let you guys know, because there's all the different areas in which the parents might be able to pay for the tuition out of some source or another. And I just want to kind of clarify what correct tuition amount is that we're looking for. So just to use this as an example, let's say that a private school charges $25,000 annually for a particular student's tuition. Now the school is not going to put $25,000 in seascapes for the tuition amount, because there's other sources of payment that are going to be before Carson Smith kicks in. So for this particular student, let's say the amount that is supplemented by Medicaid is $10,000. And let's say there's other scholarships or other programs that will be paid out before Carson Smith, and that amount equals $12,500. So really the correct net tuition amount that needs to be reported to us is going to be $2,500. You'll notice right here I say out of pocket. That is what the tuition amount that we need to know is: how much are the parents paying out of pocket for this tuition. So once all the other supplementals have been calculated, and the parents in this example are paying $2,500 out of pocket, that is the correct tuition amount that we need to have reported. So Carson Smith program should only be billed for the parents' out-of-pocket expenses. In this scenario, the correct amount of tuition is going to be that $2,500. Any questions on that? Okay, I'll go ahead and keep going then. If more Carson Smith funding is provided in an amount higher than the parents' out-of-pocket expenses, the private school will be required to repay the amount that was overpaid. So if an incorrect amount is reported, let's say the $10,000 that was compensated through Medicaid wasn't factored in, and we actually had 12,500 reported, and that student received 12,500 instead of the 2,500 they should have, that 10,000 will need to be recouped. All right. Okay, so the parent change form. When any change is made to the parent or guardian information, we need to go ahead and submit a change form to the Board of Education. It's similar to the application. Two types of proof of residency for a new parent or change in parent or guardianship in the parent's name. So if we have an adoption or something like that, and we have a new legal guardian that needs to be entered, then we need to have that proof of residency for the additional guardian. Parent or guardian signs acknowledgments and authorization. And we have a link to the change form right here. So anytime a new or additional parent needs to be entered, or if we switch parental author or parental authority, we need to have that change of parent or guardian form submitted to us so that way we can make that change in the system so we can have the correct people that are authorized to sign in our system. All right. So let's get into Seascapes just a little bit here. I'm seeing some questions coming up. Does anybody have questions before I get into the next topic?
So, know that their question, the only one here, do you know if there is a plan to help districts pay for the time that the LEAs are doing Carson Smith? That's one of the questions.
That's a good question. So the school, all districts are given money. Part of special education is that they are required to provide some services to private schools. And they are already receiving money for the time that they do things for students who are attending private schools. So that there's really money that's actually already out there for that, and that can count to fulfill those obligations for the LEA. Districts have obligations to serve students who are attending private schools and for special education.
Okay, does that answer that? All right. Okay, well then I will go ahead and get into Seascapes. So each quarter before we run the check run, there's a few pieces of information on each student that needs to be verified by the private schools. So each private school has one representative that has authorization to make these changes into Seascapes. At the beginning of this training, we went over how to access Seascapes and how to get your representative access to that. So the changes that need to be made each quarter before we run the check run for each student is enrollment. Is the student still enrolled, yes or no? So that way we can get any withdrawals out of the lottery. And then the grade level, is the student still the same grade, or did they move up a grade since the last verification quarter? Tuition, making sure the tuition amount is actually, is the tuition amount the amount actually required of the parent? So again, back to the out-of-pocket expenses, and we just went over that. Whether or not the student status is accurate. Pending if the student has not had an ATMR yet and did not have an IEP. So we need to make sure whether or not the student should be in pending status for those reasons. Whether or not the student is approved or unfunded. The student has been approved but has not had funding allocated in the lottery. If the student is in the approved status, that means the student has been through the lottery at least once before. If the student is expired status, a reevaluation has not occurred and the application has been expired. If the student's status has been withdrawn, this is generally through the parent or the private school's request, and that means that they no longer receive the scholarship. And then if there's a new field, mark if the student is full or part-time. This is something that's relatively new, and we want to make sure that we have that on there. Okay, so when you enter the tuition and fees, if there's a student that shows up and they have been withdrawn, please let us know so that way we can remove them for our system. This will prevent overpayments for students that shouldn't have gotten paid for that quarter. Mid-quarter transfers, tuition is based on the dates entered into the system. So we need to have the actual date of the student transfer, not the date that it was reported. That's very important. The actual date that the student started attending the different school, that's the transfer date that we need. Deadline to enter verifications into Seascapes will be strictly enforced. This is something that I want to reiterate and really emphasize that in the past we've kind of had some wiggle room. We just can't do that anymore. So we will be enforcing these deadlines for the schools to enter the verifications into Seascapes. Otherwise, it postpones the lottery, and that's not fair to the other students. So if a student does not submit, if the school does not submit this information by the deadline, then we will run the check run, and the students that were not verified they won't receive payment for that quarter, and they'll have to wait until the next quarter for us to include it in the next check run. So it's very important that when we send out email reminders of deadlines for you to submit your verification in Seascapes, please be cognizant of that. If your one representative happens to be on vacation that week, then make all efforts to have somebody else take that responsibility that is available, so that way you can meet that deadline.
I also, Tony, sorry, I want to mention, we usually open up that window for 2 weeks. So it's usually open for sure a good 2 weeks approximately. So that should give plenty of time for everybody. Just make sure that they hit the save button when they verify everything, number one. And then also, oh, I lost my train of thought. Darn it. But that was I guess. There was another thing.
I was going to say, while you're gaining your thought there, I just want to add as well that if we can, towards the end of the deadline, if we have time, we will notify schools that we notice have not submitted their verifications. But that's a courtesy. And so it really is upon you to pay attention to those emails. And as Esther said, it is a 2-week window, so there really shouldn't be any excuses. At the beginning of the 2 weeks, if the person that's authorized is not available, you have plenty of time to get somebody else authorized, so that way you guys can make those changes necessary. And if you have any issues, contact us right away, so that way we can get you all set up before that 2 weeks is over.
Because another thing too, the only way we can see if it's been verified is if the tuition and fees has been entered. That's how we know. And if you've marked, yes, they've been verified. But that's going into every student account, every school's account. So I did it, on one of the last 2 check runs, but it's very time consuming, and we still miss a few. And I just want to, so if you are concerned, shoot me an email with a couple base numbers. I can check them, and that will help me as well to make sure that you guys are. One of the questions here, we will send out the deadlines, or is it in there, Tony? We do have, it's on our website, I believe, accurately for the 2020-2021 school year. It's on our website, but we can send an email. Also, make sure that you guys let us know. I have like a distribution list, so if anybody's changed or you need another person from your school to be added, let me know. I can add it. I always update ours, so that way Tony and Tammy have the same list and we're all consistent, and everybody who you want to be notified is on that list. So I just throwing this in.
Thanks, Esther. And I also want to point out that.
I do want to. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, and then I'll let you go, Marlene.
Okay.
I just want to quickly say that the timelines, that sheet, those are our best estimate. They're not solid, and so pay attention to those emails, because there could be a few things in the system that we have to work out before we open up the verification window, in which case those deadlines may be off a day or two or more. And so pay attention to the emails. When we send out a mass email saying the window's now open, you guys have until this date, and then the deadline's over, that's what you have to pay attention to. The yearly sheet that just kind of shows the timelines for everything, those are our best estimate, but as we get closer to it, the emails are what you really want to pay attention to. Go ahead, Marlene.
I just want you all to be aware that Tony and Esther cannot see what you guys go in and work on. That screen in Seascapes, that is strictly for you that have been assigned to your individual schools. They cannot see that. They cannot access that. So when you go in to validate and verify all these things, it is really up to you, because there is no way that they can change anything on their end that you are putting in there. So you do need to verify and validate everything that's in there, because they cannot do it. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And then just make sure that you do save it and that you do use the little icon over on the left-hand side as well to exit. Do not use the big X on the top right-hand side. It will not disconnect your connection with the server. So therefore, somebody can come in behind you and actually get into the server, and if they're not trustworthy, and they could possibly get into your student data. So please make sure you use the little door with the green arrow to exit always.
All right, thank you, Marlene. So now we have the screen up, which it's just going to be a couple screens that you'll normally see when you log into Seascapes. And the columns that are in yellow are the areas in which you have the need to change. So you need to enter the grade level. If it's already the correct grade level, then you just leave it be. Same thing with full or half-time. If the student's now full-time and they were half-time, you need to go ahead and make those changes. And you'll also notice here that any of these columns on the very top of the header, you can do some different sorting on them by double clicking them. So you can go ahead and play with this information, at least as far as sorting goes. So that way it'll be a little bit easier for you to do your verification. Let's go to the next slide here. And so again, you'll see these areas in which you need to make those changes. We already went over the grade level, full or halftime. You need to enter the correct tuition amount, especially make sure that it is the net tuition, the out-of-pocket the parents would pay, but for Carson Smith. So that's the amount that needs to go in here. And then at the very end, you need to click whether or not you guys have reviewed this and do that for all of them. If this box is not checked, then it won't be included in the check run. Okay, and so this is how you exit the application. As Marlene said before, it's very important. Otherwise, it won't be exited properly. Make sure to save it before you click exit. And that's the only way that we can have this information fully verified. We've had in the past some people, reply to us saying, we verified everything. Just make sure that you press that save button right here on the top left corner before you click the exit button right here, right next to it. Otherwise, all that work that you did won't be saved, and then it will look as though you did nothing. So anyways, and then also these two areas right here, they allow for approved unfunded, pending only, and you cannot edit these pending students. So if a student is pending and they shouldn't be, contact us. All right. Just for private school site visits, you'll notice that we have not done site visits this year. We are required to visit 1/3 of the participating schools each year. However, due to these circumstances, we have not been able to. Generally, when it's a normal year, we will rotate. So if we do 1/3 of the schools each year, you can expect to be to receive a site visit about once every 3 years. Obviously, there's other circumstances that might put somebody in some school in a position where they're going to need to be evaluated more often than that, but generally it's once every 3 years. If you're a brand new school, then you'll be evaluated that year. And we generally try to do these in between February and May. We didn't get that this year. Schools must complete the corrective action plans within 45 days. So after the site visit, if we submit a corrective action plan for you due to a few areas that we felt need improvement, then you just have to respond to that within 45 days. But right now, this is all up in the air. We will announce when we plan to resume these site visits once it's determined safe to do so. And so just keep an ear out for us to be contacting people once we're able to resume this. This is a self-assessment form that is submitted to us before we do the site visits. disregard the dates. We'll have them updated within the current year, but you guys should be familiar with this. You need to submit these and put the dates in which each of these required documentations are requested. Just make sure you put the dates of when those documents were performed, whether it be a building inspection, food inspection, fire inspection, all of those things. And whoops, excuse me. And so make sure to answer each one of these and then have your school sign and date and then provide these back to us. These generally occur, I believe, about a month or two before the deadline, December 11th. We generally send out notifications saying, hey, we need you to complete these and get these to us by December 11th of the year. So, and I believe everybody did that. If not, we contacted you last year, so we should be good on that. Okay, so what is coming up in the future? We're pleased to announce that our current system, which is BASE, is going to be phased out and it will be replaced with a new system. This could occur pretty soon. We'll notify you if any changes to that affect or any of those changes affect you and how you submit your information. We could possibly be having the new system as early as next year, but we will keep you guys informed on when that new system is going to be up and running and how that affects you and new methods of reporting your information to us. All righty. Are there any questions that we have not addressed at this point?
On the chat box, there was, okay, it says, will we have schedule in advance? These gates will open for verification before an email is sent out. It's on our deadline on the website. So if you know, I can send that page out to everybody via email after the meeting. Again, those dates can vary, but it gives you an idea of when things will be up and when checks will be actually processed and ran. The check run has actually ran. Another question, just want to make sure the private schools know districts don't have access to seascapes. So we rely on you to share the information with the districts. We really do need that 45 days for testing. Please note that we need more than a week's notice. That's for us, Tony. I think I remember I started in this position. I didn't know we were sending out that same eligibility of who's coming up in the next little bit to the districts. So I've been able to send that the last check run as well.
All right.
And this is Tammy. Yeah. And again, notice that Kelly says it's 45 school days. So if someone comes in on May 14th and requests an evaluation that they think is going to be done before the next school year, there's only a few school days left before the end of the school year, and then that 45 days begins counting against once school is back in session in August. So if you do May 15th, let's say you say May 15th, last day of school was May 30th, that's 15 days, and then school starts, well, no, that's not even school days. So 15th to the 30th, you maybe have 10 school days there. Then the rest of the 35 is going to be after the school year starts, and it doesn't count for holidays or district times off. So you also need to understand that the districts have quite a while to get that testing done. So don't expect to contact them at the last minute and think it's going to get rushed through that. They have a lot of work to do, and they need the full days because there's a lot involved with an assessment, and they have a lot of other assessments that they're having to meet that 45-day timeline for. So please keep that in mind.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Tammy. I think that we have had quite a few people just think that they're going to get a quick turnaround and no, that 45 days is there for a reason. They really do need the full 45 school days. Are there any other questions?
On there, well, they just want us to send the assessment forms and the slides. We'll be sending the slides out. I think.
Correct.
Aren't you? Okay.
Yeah, what we'll do is we will send, once we're done here, we will send a recording of the training, and then we will also send the PowerPoint document as well. And so they'll have access to everything. They'll be able to click the links on all the forms and everything. So they should be good there.
I want to bring up another thing too. Tony, help me with this one. Basically, the fourth quarter check run deadline, we would probably need to have everything complete because we're paying in advance per quarters. So, but the fourth quarter is kind of like at the end of the year. So that one, we won't be able to like do any retro checks because we'll be closing out that year. Marlene, can you help?
Right.
I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but for
Basically, the last check in is the last check run. There's no catch up checks. There will not be anything because it's the last check run. There's not something that we can catch up because the system goes by dates and it's driven by what year we're working on, what school year we're working on. So everything in the past is past now, and now we're starting fresh and new on the new school year, and that's all the system cares about. It does not look at last year and who we paid and who we didn't pay. So basically, if you didn't get things in last year for the fourth quarter, you've lost out on the fourth quarter. So I hate to have people lose out on things because things didn't get taken care of. But the, you know, we try to keep everything. Esther and Tony have been really good about trying to keep on everybody and getting your stuff in. And I've always suggested that everybody should go in at least once a month and look at their students. Make sure that everybody's in the appropriate status. Make sure you're not missing any students that should be in there, because Esther usually doesn't, unless she's got the full application, she doesn't put in the application. If she has all the documentation, that's when she puts it in. So if you're missing a student, that's a sure sign that there's something missing, and you can contact her and say, what do I need to get for this student? So if you're doing that once a month, you shouldn't have any problems when we open up that window. So I highly suggest you do that. Also, within 90 days, it's a good time to change your password. It's if you go in, I know it's a pain to do it every month, but then when you're hitting that open window, you're also not having issues with your password as well. Though the support staff has been handling you guys, my understanding is quite well. They've been doing a great job with you.
All right. Thanks, Marlene.
This is Tammy. I have a question for any of the district people out there. I know in Alpine School District, every year we had a 45 school day calendar so that you could look at what date something was due, and then you would know what was 45 days before that. I'm not sure if every district does that, or that's something that districts would be willing to share if the private schools passed. I'm not sure. I know in Alpine we had one, but I don't know about other districts. So that's just a question. If not, what you do is you take your district's calendar and you can just count back 45 days, school days. You can make up your own if you want to, but basically, yeah, you need to kind of keep that in mind. But if the districts have something like that, you may be able to ask if they have a 45 day calendar for their district, because it'd be different for every district.
some of the questions, Tony, that were when I sent out that survey and everything, there's one here. It says, what actually needs to be on the back of the check is endorsed. We had issues last spring depositing the checks via night drop during the no lobby hours at the bank. Our bank at that time wanted us to bring in parents with each check for deposits to happen.
You broke up a little bit there. They wanted to bring the parents for what?
Oh, sorry. So it said that banks wanted them to bring in all the parents with each of the checks for deposits. So the question is what actually needs to be on the back of the check as endorsed?
It just needs the parent signature that's authorized to endorse it. So as long as that particular parent that endorsed the check is on our list for the primary or the secondary parent, and we have signatures, then that should be good. I'm not sure I understood the question because it almost sounded like the bank wanted the parents present. That can't be, is it? Is that what they asked? Did the bank?
That's what they were saying, being that the banks were closed. They're, I guess
Right.
the school put the checks through the night drop. And
Right.
so at that time, the bank wanted them to bring the parents in for each deposit to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a dispute between the bank and the school, but we would not require the parents to be physically present to there. We just need the check endorsed by them.
We do also want to bring up too, that when we send the checks to the schools, the parent or parents, whoever's going to sign that check, needs to come to your office, your school, your location.
Correct.
We do not want them mailed out to the parent.
Yes, the check, thank you for bringing that up, Esther. The check should never leave the private school's possession. The parent should be coming to the school and endorsing the check. The check should always remain in the private school's possession until they bring it to the bank. Do not mail them. Do not let the parents bring them home, any of that. The check must remain. That's part of the whole purpose of the legislation, that the check goes to the private schools, is that it needs to remain in their possession. So I appreciate that, but we do not require that the parents be present at the bank for the private schools to cash it. Just their endorsement should be enough. Thanks for clarifying that, you guys. Any other questions? And don't worry if you can't think of a question right now. We're going to close the meeting, and then if you want to email Esther or myself or via the Carson Smith emails, go ahead and do that, and then we will put together a list of questions that seem to be pretty common, and we'll add that to a frequently asked questions document, and we'll have that put up on the Carson Smith webpage, and that'll be a flowing document that we'll add to periodically. But if there are no further questions, I would just want to thank everybody that participated, and I want to thank those that were instrumental in putting this training together. Tammy, Esther, Neil, Marlene, and Alex, thank you for hosting. You can go ahead and turn off the recording now. We'll use this recording on the website so that way people can access it at any time, and then we'll also provide the PowerPoint document so you can access all the forms as well. So I appreciate everybody, and if we don't have anything further, I will go ahead and say you can go ahead and you can leave the meeting now. Have a great lunch. I appreciate everybody.